There's something quietly fascinating about the way Studio Ghibli writes men. You notice it the moment you step back from the films and start looking at the pattern. They're nothing like the kinds of men you usually see in animation. No muscular warriors fighting for dominance. No stoic heroes built to absorb pain without blinking. No protagonists who solve everything by tightening their jaw and throwing themselves into battle like it's some kind of destiny. Ghibli wants nothing to do with that version of masculinity. It never has. Instead, Ghibli writes men who feel, men who worry, men who care, men who doubt themselves and try anyway, men who get scared and still show up, men who carry guilt, hope, wonder, and responsibility in equal measure. Porco Rosso is probably the clearest entryway into that whole conversation. He's a man who hides behind cynicism, jokes, and a literal pig face because he cares more deeply than he'll ever admit. He's wounded, defensive, isolated, and tired. But underneath all of that, he's sensitive, thoughtful, and morally grounded in a way he'd never describe out loud. Porco acts like someone who has felt too much and is terrified of letting it happen again. And once you recognize that, you start seeing versions of him all over Ghibli's world. There's a kind of emotional DNA that runs through the studio's male characters. Even when they're young, they're written with a softness that most storytellers never allow boys to have. Even when they're powerful, they're defined not by that power, but by how gently they choose to use it. Even when the world gives them reasons to close off, they stay open in ways that feel almost radical. You see that openness right away in the earliest Ghibli boys. Pazu from Castle in the Sky is the perfect example. He's full of wonder, kindness, and genuine belief in people. He wants to protect Shida not by being larger than life, but by simply being there for her. Steady, present, and loyal. His courage comes from care, not ego. He's the kind of boy who hasn't learned to hide his heart yet, and Ghibli frames that innocence in a strength rather than a weakness. And what's really interesting is how that spirit carries through all the different generations of male characters Ghibli writes. Even when they grow older, even when their worlds get harsher and more complicated, they still interact with everything around them through empathy. It's like Ghibli's worlds are built for men who feel too much. Men who are trying to protect something fragile inside themselves and inside others. Men who refuse to let bitterness calcify over their humanity. Look at Ashitaka from Princess Mononoke. He's older, more grounded, carrying the weight of a curse that's literally eating him alive. The violence inside his arm is the violence of the world, a symbol of everything he's forced to confront. But instead of becoming angry, instead of retreating into vengeance, he walks into conflict with a calm sense of purpose. He listens even when he's hurt, tries to understand even when he's attacked. He refuses to hate even when he has every reason to. He's a man who leads with clarity rather than dominance. Then you swing into someone like Haku in Spirited Away, and the pattern keeps repeating. Haku is a boy who has lost his identity, stripped of his name and bound to a system that views him as a tool. But even in that confusion and servitude, he still protects Chihiro with a quiet, unwavering tenderness. His strength isn't brute force, it's the instinct to guide, comfort, and help someone find their way in a world he barely understands himself. He isn't a hero because he's powerful. He's a hero because he remembers how to care long before he remembers who he is. Even the more chaotic characters like Howl from Howl's Moving Castle fits into this emotional landscape. Howl is messy, insecure, terrified of responsibility, and constantly running from adulthood. But underneath all of the theatrics is a man who wants peace more than anything. Someone who hides because he's scared, someone who transforms into a monster because he's overwhelmed by the world's cruelty. His journey isn't about becoming brave, it's about allowing himself to stop hiding. And then you have someone like Jiro from The Wind Rises, a completely different flavor of Ghibli man. He's a dreamer whose brilliance is swallowed by the machinery of war. He wants to create beauty, elegant aircraft, quiet expressions of imagination. But the era he's born into weaponizes every dream he conjures. He's a man who tries to pursue meaning in a world that keeps twisting that meaning into something tragic. His struggle is quieter, but it's no less painful. All of these men, hopeful, wounded, anxious, gentle, idealistic, and grieving, somehow feel like different responses to the same unspoken question. What does it mean to be a good man in a world that keeps trying to harden you? And Ghibli's answer is always the same. A good man is someone who refuses to let the world take away his humanity. Whether he's a boy in a mining town, a prince with a curse, a spirit without a name, a wizard with a borrowed heart, an engineer caught between beauty and war, or a pilot hiding behind a pig's face, Ghibli writes men who care deeply, sometimes painfully, in spite of everything. That's the foundation. What all these men share, Porco, Ashitaka, Haku, Howl, and Jiro, is that none of them are heroic because they overcome their pain. They're heroic because they carry it with honesty. They don't bury it, they don't deny it, they don't numb it into oblivion. They live with it, they learn from it, and they let it soften the way they move through the world. Even the younger Ghibli boys carry their own flavor of this. Look at Shun from Up on Poppy Hill. He's a teenager navigating identity, family history, and the fear of not knowing where he belongs. He's quiet, introspective, and thoughtful without ever being emotionally shut down. Or Sosuke from Ponyo, who despite being 5 years old, shows a level of care, responsibility, and earnestness most adult protagonists in other films never touch. He's a child who treats the magical chaos around him not with fear, but with compassion. These boys aren't exceptions. They continue the same emotional lineage. Even Ghibli's father figures reflect this pattern. Tatsuo from My Neighbor Totoro, for example, isn't the distant, stern father you see in so many other animated stories. He's gentle, patient, and sensitive to what his daughters are going through. He makes space for their emotions instead of shutting them down. In a film about grief, uncertainty, and childhood anxiety, he's a calming presence, a reminder that strength can be soft. Across all these stories, Ghibli keeps returning to a specific idea. Men don't become heroes by being invulnerable. They become heroes by being open, by being willing to feel, by letting themselves care even when it hurts. Ghibli's men aren't broken because they're weak. They're broken because they're human. And the studio never tells them to hide it. It tells them to grow through it. That's the thread that runs from Pazu all the way to Porco. The belief that gentleness isn't a liability, vulnerability isn't a flaw, and emotional honesty isn't something men should be ashamed of. It's something they should build themselves around. The longer you sit with Ghibli's films, the more you start to feel like the studio isn't just telling stories. It's making a quiet argument about what masculinity could look like if we stripped away all the noise, if we removed the cultural expectations. The bravado, the posturing, the demand that men be hard and closed off, and relentlessly self-sufficient. Ghibli seems to be asking, what if strength wasn't about endurance or dominance? What if it was about openness? What if the bravest thing a man could do was feel deeply and act gently? And every male character we've talked about, from Pazu to Ashitaka, from Haku to Howl, from Jiro to Porco, feels like a different answer to that question. What makes these characters special isn't that they're flawless. In fact, Ghibli goes out of its way to avoid writing perfect men. Instead, it writes men who fail, who doubt, who fear, who love, who hide, who regret, who seek connection, who run away, who come back, who lose themselves, and sometimes, if they're lucky, find themselves again. Ghibli writes men who are shaped by the world, but not defined by its cruelty. Men who refuse to let violence, trauma, or fear steal their last bit of gentleness. Men who don't confuse hardness with strength. Men who don't treat softness as weakness. And that's what makes Ghibli's portrayal of masculinity feel so rare. It treats kindness as a form of bravery. It treats vulnerability as something meaningful. It treats emotional honesty as a victory. And it treats compassion not as something men should grow out of, but something they should grow into. In a way, all of Ghibli's men feel like answers to the same silent question. How do you stay human in a world that wants to make you something else? Porco answers it by learning that shame doesn't have to define him. Ashitaka answers it by choosing clarity over hatred. Haku answers it by rediscovering himself. Howl answers it by finally showing up. Jiro answers it by dreaming anyway. Shun answers by navigating identity with humility, and Sosuke also answers it by treating magic with simple, earnest care. Each of them demonstrates a different shade of what masculinity can look like when you strip away all the noise, the expectations, the stereotypes, the fear of looking weak. Ghibli men choose tenderness even when it hurts. They choose compassion even when it's complicated. They choose connection even when it scares them. And they choose humanity even when the world around them tries to break it. And maybe that's why these characters linger long after the movies end. They're not fantasies of strength. They're reflections of who men really are, or who they could be, when they let themselves feel, soften, heal, and hope. Ghibli doesn't write perfect men. He writes human ones.